Good Vach, Shavua Tov, a good week to you, my holy sisters and brothers. Great to be starting the new week with learning some beautiful Torah on a Saturday night. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Saturday night? And apologies, it's so late on the East Coast. It's just that time of year. And maybe even a little extra late tonight because by our minyan we had a very special guest, the Koidenover Rebbe. And suddenly our third meal on Shabbos became a Rebbe's Tish. And I make announcements in our minyan, and I had announced, that Myra of the evening service would begin at 8:30. And then when the rabbi began speaking by the meal, he says, this reminds me of a man who planned and waited and saved and traveled and arranged his whole life to visit this incredible palace of the king. And he finally got there, and they brought him in through the outer wall, the inner rooms, past this guard and that guard, up the stairs. And finally, he came before the king in the throne room, and the first question he asked was, "So when do I leave?" Meaning, why would we want to rush out of Shabbos? Okay, it's not that we want to rush out of Shabbos, but I, for one, have to come teach a class. And it's the custom of our shul, to start Myra, the evening service, in about an hour and 4 or an hour and 5 minutes after Mincha on Shabbos afternoons. So the Rebbe was basically respectful of our custom. But he probably finished an hour earlier than he would normally have finished, but it was still later than normal for us. At any rate, here we are. Joe in the Inland Empire, Shandor in the Bronx, Bill in Missouri, Abba in Crown Heights, Franco in Trieste, Italy. Chaim in Florida, Aoife in Florida, Marie in Freeport. Welcome, everybody. We are continuing our journey through Tractate Bava Metzia, the 22nd volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 5. Today, we open Mishna number 6, and God willing, we'll open Mishna number 7 as well. Mishnah 6. One may appraise a cow or a donkey or any item that generates revenue while it eats and give it to another to feed it and take care of it in exchange for 1/2 the profits, with the one who cares for the animal benefiting from the profits that it generates during the period in which he raises it. Afterward, they divide the profit that accrues due to the appreciation in value of the animal. That's why they appraised it at the beginning of this period, and then they appraise it at the end. And they're going to divide that profit because one is doing all the work, right, and feeding the animal, etc., fattening it, raising it, and the other one provided the animal. And they also divide the profits that accrue due to the offspring that the animal produces while in the care of the one who's raising it. In a place where it is customary to divide the offspring immediately upon their birth, they divide them. And in a place where it is customary for the one who cared for the mother to raise the offspring for an additional period of time before dividing them, so they will do. He raises them. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, one may appraise a calf together with its mother or a foal with its mother, even though these young animals do not generate revenue while they eat. The costs of raising the young animal need not be considered, and one may inflate, umafriz, the rental fee paid for the field, for his field, and he need not be concerned with regard to the prohibition of prohibited interest, right? As the Gemara will explain. That's the Mishnah. And again, this is kind of in keeping with our last Mishnah, where we came to understand, in the case of the storekeeper, that if the investor, some investor, right, provides all the merchandise that's going to be in the store, and he bears all the loss if it doesn't go well, and the storekeeper simply splits the profits when they sell the merchandise in the store, this would be permitted and there would not be a problem with interest. But that's not such a great deal for the investor. And so they acquired the custom, and then the sages said that this is the way it should be done, that in that case where somebody provides the capital or the merchandise, or now we're talking about animals, that he doesn't just provide all of the investment and bears the risk, all the risk of the loss, but rather he puts in that investment, and half of it is characterized as the investment, and half of it is characterized as a loan to the one who's going to manage the store, or the one who's going to raise the animal. And therefore because it's a loan and he owns half the business, he's going to be responsible for losses, half the losses, if there are losses. Now the problem is that when half of it is a loan, and the one who's raising the animal or taking care of the store, etc., is providing the service of running the store for the other one on the money that he has invested, not the loan part. So then it starts to look like the work that the worker is putting in on behalf of the half of the investment that is investment, as opposed to the loan that he's putting in work for his own half of the business, that the half of his work that he's providing to the other guy for free takes on the appearance of interest. His work is like interest on the loan portion of the investment. And that's why the investor is also going to have to agree that the worker is paid some wages. And they disputed how much is the minimum wage so that we can agree that he's being paid a wage. But he can't just provide that service for free lest it look like it have the appearance of prohibited interest. So here, where somebody's providing an animal and the other one is raising it, right? If he puts in the animal and he gets the animal back, and the other one is just benefiting from the work that he does, fattening it by splitting half the profits, that would be okay. But if it starts to look like this animal, half of it is invested and the other half is a loan, so that the worker has, his own investment in this project, then we would run into the same problem. And the difference is, what's going to make the difference is, well, what if there are losses in this venture? Is the one who's doing the work going to be responsible for some of those losses? Then we can say that half of it was a loan to him, right? Because he's an owner in this enterprise, not just a worker. Okay, those are the general issues that are at play here. So the Gemara says, the sages taught. Now we're going to start with the last thing that our Mishna said. That one need not be concerned with, that one may inflate the rental fee paid for his field. So what's going on? The sages taught one may inflate the rental fee paid for his field, and he need not be concerned with regard to the prohibition of interest. How so? In the case of one who rents a field from another for the price of 10 kor of wheat per year, okay? Somebody owns a field, right? My neighbor John owns a field. And I'm going to say, and John is not going to work the field, right? He's old, he's busy, he's got other things going on. So I say to John, okay, listen, I'll rent your field. I don't have money now, but I'll pay you the rental fee out of what I harvest from the field, right? So in other words, we're not going to split the profits of this field. I'm going to owe you a fixed amount. 10 kor of wheat. We both agree this field is going to produce more than that. But 10 kor of wheat from the produce of this field, I'm going to give to you as a rental. That's the rental fee of the field. So he's guaranteed 10 kor of wheat. And anything I can generate beyond that, right, that's going to be I'm out 10 kor, right? So, anything I generate beyond that, that's going to be what I take out of this venture. All right, so now what? So we've got this agreement. In the case of one who rents a field from another for the price of 10 kor of wheat per year, and the renter says to the owner, give me 200 dinars as a loan, and I will use it to cultivate the field and equip it by fertilizing it and hiring people to work in it, and then I will pay you 12 kor per year in addition to returning your 200 dinars. Now you might think, well, wait a minute. Okay, I understand I'm paying rent so that I have use of the field. I can farm it. I can produce. I know I'm going to produce a lot more than 10 kor of wheat. That's what I'm going to give to him as the rental fee. And the rest is going to be my profit. Okay, makes sense. Now I say to him, listen, I don't have any money right now, but if we could invest some money besides just me doing the backbreaking labor of farming the field, if I can hire some people to help me, if I can purchase some equipment, I can improve the field and I can make it much more productive. So lend me the 200 dinars, I'll pay you back the 200 dinars, and instead of giving you 10 core of wheat at the end, I'll give you 12. Well, now that sounds like the 2 extra core of wheat that I'm going to pay him would be interest on the loan of 200 dinars, and that would be prohibited, right? Wrong. In that situation, it is permitted, as the 200 dinars are viewed as a joint investment in improving the field, with the owner providing the capital and the renter providing the labor. And the higher rental fee is therefore paid not as interest on the loan, but rather because this field is going to be worth more after we invest these 200 dinars in it, and it's the proper valuation of a rental fee to pay 12 core per year rather than 10 core per year. But one may not inflate the rental fee paid for a store or a ship. The renter cannot borrow money from the owner to purchase merchandise to sell in the store or transport in the ship and in return increase the rental fee, because that is considered a loan with interest. Right? If all I'm using the loan for is to buy more merchandise to sell in the store, and in return for that, I'm going to increase the rental fee, no good, because really all I'm doing is borrowing money and paying interest on it. However, if I borrow money in order to improve the store, as we shall see, and make it a more attractive store that generates more business, that would be permitted for the same reason it's permitted to improve the field. Rav Nachman says that Rabbi Bar Abba says there are times when one may inflate the rental fee paid for a store, such as in a case where one needs money in order to paint a design on its walls, or in the case of a ship where one needs money to fashion a new sail. And the Gemara explains it is permitted when the money is borrowed to invest in a store in order to paint a design on its walls, because people will want to come to the store, to the more attractive store, in order to purchase, and the profits are thereby increased. And similarly, it is permitted when the money is to be used for a ship, to fashion a sail, because the profits from the use of the ship are greater since the sail is improved, and therefore in these cases the arrangement is an investment, similar to the case of the field and not interest. Since the subject of a ship was raised, the Gemara mentions a related statement of Rav. Rav said, for a ship, it is permitted to conduct a transaction where someone pays rent for the use of the ship, and is also liable to pay for any damage caused to the ship. And Rav Kahana and Rav Asi said to Rav, if he receives rent, then he should not receive payment for damage. And if he receives payment for damage, then he should not receive rent. As if the ship is the responsibility of the renter, then this is a loan. And if he pays rent for such a loan, interest, prohibited interest. Rav was silent, and it appeared that he could not answer this question. So Rav Sheshes said, what is the reason that Rav was silent? Did he not hear that which is taught in a Baraisa? Even though the sages said that one may not accept investment, that one may not accept tzon barzel. Tzon barzel. Okay? What is tzon barzel? Literally translated, iron sheep. Why do we call it an iron sheep? Normally, we're going to render this in English, guaranteed investment. In other words, if I give you a sheep to raise, okay, what happens if the sheep dies? Who is going to make good on that loss? If the one borrowing the sheep, right, who's going to raise the sheep and try to generate some profit from it, if he's guaranteeing that if the sheep dies, he's going to return it, well, that's a loan, not an investment, right? A guaranteed investment is not an investment. A guaranteed investment is a loan. And if there's a charge for the loan, that's prohibited interest. And that's why you cannot accept a guaranteed investment. A Jew cannot accept a guaranteed investment from a Jew. Meaning, one may not accept from a Jew animals to raise and receive one half of the profits, while also accepting full responsibility to pay the initial value of the animals in the event that there is a loss, as this arrangement is deemed a loan with interest. But one may accept a guaranteed investment from Gentiles, because there is no prohibition against paying them interest. But nevertheless, the sages said, if one appraised a cow for another to raise and to divide the profits, and the one accepting the cow said to the cow's owner, your cow is evaluated for me at 30 dinars if I do not return it to you, and I will pay you a selah per month for the use of it, this is permitted, because he did not make it a matter of lending money. He did not make it a matter of lending money. And the Gemara is going to explain more about that, but just where the halacha ended up on this question, it is permitted to rent an animal and evaluate its worth by saying, your cow is evaluated for me at 30 dinars if it dies, and I will pay you a dinar as a rental fee for each month I keep it. And some say that if the cow dies, it is evaluated at the time of its death and not from the time that the rental was executed. So the question is, why is this not a loan? Why are we saying it's a rental if the renter is guaranteeing that if the cow dies, not because of his negligence, right, but if it just dies of natural causes while in his care, that he's going to make good on it? That sounds like a loan. The Gemara asks rhetorically, and did he not make it a matter of lending money? He most certainly did. He most certainly did, as he obligated himself to pay for the cow if he does not return it, making the transaction into a loan. And therefore, the payment of a selah per month should constitute interest. So why is this permitted? So Rav Sheshes said it means that he did not make it a matter of lending money while the cow was alive, meaning that he did not obligate himself to return this specific sum to him if the value of the cow decreased, but rather agreed to pay the set payment of 30 dinars only after its death. Therefore, the transaction was not a loan, and the monthly payment is not interest. According to this baraisa, the law should be the same in the case of a ship. And Rav Papa said, in fact, the law is that in the case of a ship, it is permitted to collect rent and payment for damage. And the men of pitch, right? That means sailors, who use tar and pitch to seal the timbers of the ship. The men of pitch are accustomed to paying rent at the time of pulling and paying for damage at the time of breakage. And the Gemara asks, is that to say that this matter depends on custom? Is there no halacha with regard to this issue? And the Gemara answers, because the Baraisa taught this, it is an acceptable custom, and therefore it is permitted. Now we're on page 70a. Rav Anan says that Shmuel says it is permitted to lend with interest money belonging to orphans. Since the orphans are minors and exempt from the mitzvahs, the prohibition against taking interest does not apply to them. And Rav Nachman said to them, because they are orphans, may we feed them prohibited items? Okay, they're orphans. You're saying they're not just orphans because, my mom died. That makes me an orphan. What they're saying is they're minor orphans, right? We are handling their money for them because they're orphans, and it's because they're minors that they're not obligated in the mitzvahs. Okay, all right. So they're not obligated in mitzvahs. But would we feed them, pork? Obviously not. They're not obligated in mitzvahs like an adult, but nevertheless, we wouldn't feed them prohibited foods. And in harsher language, Rav Nachman added, orphans that consume that which is not theirs, right? If we lend out their money for interest to another Jew, they would be receiving something that is not theirs. And orphans that consumes that which is not theirs will follow their deceased parent to the grave. It cannot be that this was Shmuel's intention. Therefore, Rav Nachman said to Rav Anan, say to me now, what was the actual incident where you thought that Shmuel had said that a custodian of the assets of an orphan is permitted to rent those assets to another Jew for interest? To lend for interest. And Rav Anan said to him, well, what actually happened was there was a certain kettle that belonged to the children of Mar Ukva, who were minor orphans, and this kettle was in the house of Mar Shmuel, who would rent it out on behalf of the orphans. And Mar Shmuel would weigh the copper kettle and then give it out. And when the renter returned it, Mar Shmuel would weigh it and take it back. And he would take a rental fee for the use of the kettle. And he would also take payment for the depreciation of the kettle due to the reduction in weight of the copper metal. Now, in general, the law is that if he takes a rental fee, he should not take payment for depreciation. And if he takes payment for depreciation, this means the kettle was not a rental, but rather was a loan. And therefore, he should not take a rental fee, as by taking both, it has the appearance or even the actuality of prohibited interest. Nevertheless, Mar Shmuel did so with the kettle belonging to Mar Ukva's children, which means he rendered it permitted for the orphans to take interest. Rav Nachman said to him, "There is no proof from a case like this that the assets of minor orphans may be lended out at interest. There is no proof from a case like this, as even for bearded ones, meaning adults, it is permitted to act in this manner, as the owners accept upon themselves the depreciation of the copper, as the more that the copper is burned, the more the value of the pot is diminished. And since this is so, the renters pay for the visible depreciation as measured by the reduction in the weight of the vessel, and therefore this arrangement is certainly permitted." In other words, it's just part of the rental fee that when you bring it back, depending on how much hard use you put the kettle through while you had it rented, you're going to also have to pay for the amount of copper that has disappeared from it. Rabba Bar Shela says that Rav Chisda says, and some say that Rabba Bar Yosef Bar Chama says that Rav Shesha says it is permitted to lend the money of orphans to be invested in a business venture that is close to profit and far from loss. So close to profit and far from loss. Now, we said before that if it's a guaranteed investment, iron sheep, right, where the renter takes responsibility that he must bring back exactly what he took, and that he bears all risk. So that now resembles a loan more than an investment, let's say. And then that's not permitted for a Jew to invest with a guaranteed investment in another Jew. That's definitely prohibited. So now, if you have an investment that is almost iron sheep, almost tzon barzel, almost a guaranteed investment, we call this close to profit and far from loss. So this has the smell of prohibited interest, because too many times it could result in prohibited interest, and so this should be prohibited. But they're saying that for the money of orphans, which we need to protect their investment since they can't do it themselves, for them this would be permitted. Since this is only a hint of interest, the relevant prohibition is a matter of rabbinic law, and the sages rendered it permitted in the case of minor orphans, in order that their inheritance be preserved for them. And the sages taught if there is a joint venture in which the conditions for the investor are close to profit and far from loss, then the investor is a wicked person, as this is too similar to a loan with interest. If it's guaranteed, like you're going to get back what you put in plus profit, right, where it's guaranteed, where there's no risk, then it's a loan, not an investment. And that's why the profit then becomes prohibited interest. And that's why now we're saying if it's too close to that, right, it's like almost guaranteed profit, then this is something that a wicked person would do who is not pious enough to avoid such an arrangement. Now, if the conditions for the investor are rather the opposite, close to loss and far from profit, well, then he is a pious person, as he accepts additional restrictions upon himself in order to be absolutely sure that he is never taking prohibited interest. If it is close to profit and close to loss, or far from profit and far from loss, this is the quality of every person who acts in accordance with this law, right? High risk, high yield, okay, that's fine. Low risk, low yield, that's fine. But if it's very high yield and low risk, there's something fishy going on there, and that's something you need to avoid. And if it's high risk, low yield, why would you do it? Well, it's because maybe you're helping somebody out and you know there's no risk of prohibited interest. Rabba said to Rav Yosef, when we are entrusted with this money belonging to orphans, what do we do with it? Right. So we're entrusted with money belonging to orphans. There wasn't, government, there wasn't treasury bills, right? They didn't have T-bills back then. So you couldn't just put it under a mattress because then it's not generating income. Those coins could become devalued. It's dangerous. You could end up losing the whole thing. You have to put the money to work. You're doing it on behalf of orphans who can't make decisions for themselves. So you'd like to make the maximum possible profit that's permitted for this investment on behalf of minor orphans, right? So when we're entrusted with this money belonging to orphans, what do we do with it? What is the halakhically appropriate way to manage these funds on behalf of the orphans so that they do not squander or lose their inheritance? And Rav Yosef said to him, we set up a special court that holds the money for them, and we instruct the court to give it to them dinar by dinar according to their needs. Rabbah said to him, but if the estate is managed in that way, the principal, meaning the estate itself, will be depleted, and therefore the court will not be acting as suitable guardians for the orphans, as they will not be properly administering their estate. It should be invested in something safe and legal, but it needs to be invested, not just put, aside and then give them what they need when they need it and slowly deplete the fund. Rav Yosef said to him, what does the master do in such a case? And Rabbah said to him, we look for a man who has scraps of gold, and we purchase the gold from him, and then we give it back to him in a joint business venture with terms that are close to profit and far from loss. And the Gemara explains what Rabbah says. We specifically buy scraps of gold, but we do not buy a specific gold item. Why? Because maybe it is a deposit in the possession of the one holding it, and the owner will come and provide distinguishing marks and take it, and then the orphans will suffer a loss. But if it's just scraps of gold that we can, measure by weight and understand what it's worth, nobody's going to come and claim and say, those are my scraps of gold. And then we can invest the gold in some kind of a venture that is close to profit and far from loss. Something like gold is just so reliable. And we know that if we take these scraps of gold and fashion them into a properly made gold bowl, we can expect that there's going to be a certain amount of profit, and that's going to be okay. Wouldn't be okay necessarily for an adult, but okay for the estate of minor orphans. Rav Ashi said, this works out well if a man is found who has scraps of gold. But what do we do if no man is found with scraps of gold? Shall the money of the orphans be depleted? There is a possibility that the extra precaution taken to avoid the appearance of interest may lead to a loss for the orphans. So rather, Rav Ashi said, we look for a man whose properties are quiet, meaning there is no claim disputing his ownership of them, and who is trustworthy, and who listens to and obeys the laws of Torah, and is not subject to excommunication by the sages, meaning that he is known as one who obeys the court's instructions willingly without having to be coerced. And we give him this money in court as a joint business venture with terms that are close to profit and far from loss. And in this way, the orphan's money can be invested in a safe and profitable manner. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 6. Now we're on page 70b, and we open Mishnah number 7. One may not accept from a Jew sheep to raise or other items to care for as tzon barzel, a guaranteed investment, in which the terms of the transaction dictate that the one accepting the item takes upon himself complete responsibility to repay its value in the event of either depreciation or loss, but receives only part of the profit. Why? Because this is a loan, as the principal is fixed and always returned to the owner, because it was guaranteed, and any additional sum that the owner receives is interest. But one may accept a guaranteed investment from Gentiles, as there is no prohibition of interest in transactions with them. I want to read something to you it's actually what I said to you a few days ago on why is it that it's absolutely prohibited to lend at interest to your fellow Jew, but it is permitted to lend at interest to a non-Jew, and the Torah says that specifically. Is this some kind of we are the chosen people and we are better and we treat each other better than we treat other people? No. No. But what it does mean is that we have enhanced responsibilities to our family members. So here's how it's written. About lending, borrowing an item and borrowing and lending an item with interest. The three Torah passages prohibiting interest, Exodus 22:24, Leviticus 25:35 through 38, and Deuteronomy 23:20 and 21, all specify that the prohibition applies when lending money to another Jew. Furthermore, the Torah directly states, Deuteronomy 23:21, that it is permitted for one to collect interest when lending to Gentiles. This should not be viewed as prejudiced clannishness, but rather as an exhibition of preferential treatment toward one's family members. One might also claim that since Gentiles have no compunction about collecting interest from Jews, the latter should feel at ease conducting business in a similar way. In general, the Torah impresses upon its adherents that one's brother should be treated differently than a stranger. So there you go. And, says the Mishnah, one may borrow money from them, and one may lend money to them with interest. And similarly, with regard to a Gentile who resides in the land of Israel and observes the 7 Noahide commandments, this is known as the Ger Toshav, the resident alien, one may borrow money from him with interest and lend money to him with interest, since he is not a Jew. Also, a Jew may serve as a middleman and lend a Gentile's money to another Jew with the knowledge of the Gentile, but not with the knowledge of a Jew, i.e. the middleman himself, as the Gemara will explain. That's Mishnah number 7. By the way, the difference, perhaps, it's worth noting that you have enhanced responsibilities to your fellow Jew that you don't have to non-Jews, but it is possible to become a Jew. It's not an exclusive club that nobody can join. Anyone can become a Jew if he's willing to take on himself, the proper conversion process, to learn the laws and to agree to be bound by the laws. And that's why an Orthodox conversion requires that the person undertakes to become a Shomer Torah, Shomer Mitzvah, Shomer Shabbos Jew. If you don't want to, convert to Judaism without intending to keep Shabbos, because you're not obligated to keep Shabbos when you're not Jewish. But when you become Jewish, if you don't keep Shabbos, okay, that's an avera, that's a transgression. So you wouldn't enter the family with planning to transgress the laws. Okay, now the Gemara on Mishnah number 7. With regard to the ruling that a guaranteed investment is considered a loan with interest, the Gemara asks, is this to say that the guaranteed investment stands in the possession of the recipient, i.e. the recipient is viewed as its owner? And the Gemara raises a contradiction from a Mishnah that we encounter in Bechoros 16a. In the case of one who accepts from Gentiles an animal as a guaranteed investment, the offspring are exempt from the laws of the firstborn. This exemption apparently proves that the sheep still legally belong to the Gentile owner, right? It's a loan. Guaranteed investment is a loan. If you are guaranteeing that you're going to replace the animal no matter what, it's a loan. Can you take a guaranteed investment from a Gentile? Yes, because you can pay interest. In other words, we're not saying that you can charge Gentile interest. That's not what we're talking about right now. Right now, what we're talking about is whether it's permitted to pay interest to a Gentile, and that is permitted for a Jew to do. So you can take an animal as a guaranteed investment. while you've taken that animal as a guaranteed investment from a Gentile, if it's a female animal and its firstborn is a male and the temple is standing, so that animal stands to be sacrificed as a bechor. But since this animal belongs to a Gentile, that law does not apply to the firstborn male offspring of that female animal. Abaye said, this is not difficult. That case, referring to the Mishna in Bechoros, is where the Gentile owner of the sheep accepts upon himself the responsibility for losses due to an accident or depreciation in the market value. And that is why the sheep are considered to still belong to him. And this case, referring to the Mishnah here, is where the owner did not accept upon himself responsibility for losses due to an accident or depreciation. Therefore, the guaranteed investment stands in the possession of the recipient, and presumably, if there was a firstborn, the firstborn was a male of the female animal that he's caring for, he would have to apply the laws of the Bechor to it. Rava said to Abaye, if the owner accepted upon himself responsibility for losses due to an accident or depreciation in market value, can you call it a guaranteed investment? This case is not a guaranteed investment, as the owner is not guaranteed to receive what he had given, but rather this is a joint business venture that is permitted not only between a Jew and a Gentile, but even between two Jews. So Rava continues, and furthermore, even if one will grant that this arrangement can be called a guaranteed investment, there is another difficulty. Instead of the Tana teaching in the latter clause of the Mishnah, but one may accept a guaranteed investment from Gentiles, let the Tana distinguish between the case itself, that of accepting a guaranteed investment from a Jew. He should have taught, in what case is this statement, i.e. that one may not accept from a Jew sheep to raise or other items to care for under the terms of guaranteed investment? When was this said? It is said when the owner did not accept upon himself responsibility for losses due to an accident or depreciation, the owner who provided the animal. But if the owner did accept upon himself responsibility for losses due to accident or depreciation, then one may enter into such an arrangement. So rather, Rava rejected this explanation. And Rava said, both this case in the Mishnah here and that case with regard to the firstborn animal are discussing a situation where the owner did not accept upon himself responsibility for losses due to an accident or depreciation. And with regard to the firstborn, this is the reason that the offspring are exempt from the laws of the Bechor, of the firstborn. Since if for some reason the recipient does not give the money that is due to the Gentile will come and seize the animal, and if he does not find the animal, he will seize the offspring. This means that the hand of a Gentile is in the middle, i.e. the Gentile has some degree of ownership of the bodies of the offspring. And there is a law, in every case where the hand of a Gentile is in the middle, the animal is exempt from the laws of the firstborn. By contrast, in the case of the Mishnah concerning the laws of interest, the animal is entirely in the possession of the recipient. Apropos the discussion concerning the laws of interest, the Gemara cites several Agadic statements on the subject. The verse states, he who augments his substance by interest and increase gathers it for him who has pity on the poor. Proverbs 28:8. What does this cryptic statement mean? The Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the phrase, him who has pity on the poor? How does this money ultimately reach someone who has pity on the poor? And Rav said this is referring to one such as King Shapur of Persia, for ultimately the money will reach the king who provides for the poor from the possessions of the one who lends with interest. So Rav Nachman said that Rav Huna said to me that this verse is necessary only to state that even interest that a Jew took from a Gentile will ultimately reach the government treasury, and the one who took it will not be successful. So here he's saying, okay, it's permitted to lend money at interest to Gentiles, but probably you should find a different line of work. Rava raised an objection to the statement of Rav Nachman. The verse states, unto a Gentile tashich. That's Deuteronomy 23:21, which indicates that it is permitted for a Jew to take interest from a Gentile. As what is the meaning of tashich? Doesn't it mean the same as tishach, take interest, thereby teaching that one may take interest from a Gentile. So if it's permitted by the Torah, why are you saying that a Jew shouldn't do it? And the Gemara refutes this claim. No, it means to pay interest, meaning that you can borrow from the Gentile and pay him interest, but you shouldn't be lending at interest even to a Gentile. And the Gemara asks, is it not sufficient without this? In other words, can the verse actually require Jews to borrow money from a Gentile and to pay him interest? Are you saying it's not only permitted to borrow money from Gentiles and pay interest, it is obligated to take loans from Gentiles? That cannot be. So the Gemara answers, it does not mean that borrowing money with interest is a commandment. Rather, the verse mentions paying interest to a Gentile in order to exclude your brother, to teach that although one may pay interest to a Gentile, one may not pay interest to a Jew. So the Gemara challenges this explanation of the verse. The prohibition against paying interest to your brother is written explicitly in the continuation of the same verse that you're talking about. Unto your brother you shall not lend with interest. Consequently, there is no need to learn this law from an inference. So the Gemara responds, it is necessary to teach that if one pays interest to a Jew, he violates both the positive mitzvah to pay interest to a Gentile but not to a Jew, and the prohibition against paying interest to a Jew. I'm almost done for today, so if you have questions or comments, please get them in now. Rava raised an objection to the statement of Rav Nachman based on another difficulty in the Mishnah, which teaches one may borrow money from them and one may lend money to them with interest. And similarly, with regard to the resident alien, the ger toshav, one may borrow money from him and lend money to him with interest, since he is not a Jew. So the Mishnah indicates that a Jew may lend money with interest to a Gentile, lechatchila, ab initio. It's not only permitted after you did it, but you shouldn't do it. In fact, it seems to indicate you can do it. So Rav Chia, the son of Rav Huna, said the ruling of this Mishnah is necessary only to teach that one may lend money with interest to a ger toshav only to the extent required to provide a livelihood to the lender, but not to do so as a regular business. Ravina said, here in the Mishnah we are dealing with Torah scholars for whom it is permitted to lend money to a Gentile with interest. And the Gemara explains, what is the reason that the sages decreed that one should not lend money to a Gentile with interest? And the reason is that perhaps the Jew will learn from the Gentile's actions. Continuous interactions with Gentiles for the sake of financial dealings may have a negative influence on a Jew. And since in this case that lender is a Torah scholar, he will not learn from a Gentile's actions. So the sages warned Jews about spending too much time with Gentiles lest they assimilate and become like the Gentiles and lose their adherence to Torah learning, Torah commandments, a life of Torah. Now, that's where we're going to finish, but I just wanted to... Okay, so unto a Gentile tashich, what is the law? Can we lend money at interest to Gentiles? According to the Rambam, it is a mitzvah to lend money to a Gentile with interest, although by rabbinic law, this is permitted only in specific cases, as noted previously. And the Ravad and the Ramban and other commentaries disagree with Ramban and hold that it is not a mitzvah at all. That's where the law ended up. And the note from Rav Steinsaltz, the Rambam interprets this in accordance, so unto a Gentile tashik, it is permitted, right? Accordance with the straightforward reading of the Sifrei to mean that one who lends money to a Gentile with interest actually fulfills a commandment because it is permitted. And if you do something that is permitted, it's almost like you're doing something that is in the Torah to do, so it's a mitzvah. But by rabbinic law, we say we shouldn't do it, so we don't mix too much with the Gentiles. Now, many authorities dispute this interpretation and claim, based on the Gemara here as well as other sources, that it teaches only that one who lends money to a Jew with interest violates both the positive mitzvah and the negative mitzvah. The Ramban notes that there are similar formulations with regard to other laws as well. Okay, and I'm just not finding the note right now. But what he said also, right, we did see just briefly that you can lend money to the Gentile for interest, even though it's sort of recommended that we don't get into that business. If it's necessary for the livelihood of the Jew, then he can do it. And, right, so in later centuries than when the sages were having this discussion, when Jews found themselves living in the diaspora in Europe where they were prohibited to own land, right? That was the big one. They were prohibited to own land. So since the number one most typical job in Europe at that time was being a farmer, and Jews were excluded from that, so then they needed to be some kind of merchant, and then there were heters given, right, permission given to engage in lending, and that's how the Jews came to be money lenders, and then anti-Semitism and Jew hatred came to them being labeled as some kind of like they were doing something wrong. But they weren't, and it was a valuable service because the Christians took on themselves, I'm sure Bill can comment more knowledgeably than I, but I believe the Christians took on themselves not to lend to each other at interest. So if people needed to borrow money and there was no source of the money, it was very useful for them to have Jews in their kingdom from whom they could borrow. The problem, of course, became they would overextend themselves, they didn't want to pay back. Well, then they could just accuse the Jew of anything. The Jews had no protectors, and this could often lead to a pogrom or worse situations, and many horrors in history in the diaspora stemmed from situations like that. Okay, Bill says about the guaranteed investment is an iron sheep, and then an investment that is close to profit and far from loss, Bill would call an aluminum sheep, as it were. Very good. Sharon, but if the cattle depreciates with usage and it was charged to the renter, wouldn't it be acceptable if the future renters would have to be charged less? I think that's a really interesting question. Yeah, I mean, that's why the depreciation matters, and that's what he's being compensated for. And if he is being compensated for, then maybe the rent should be less. That's a great question. I'm not sure what the answer to that is. Sharon also says, didn't today's Torah portion tell us to treat the stranger who dwells among us as oneself? Does this exclude financial transactions? Right, so about the Ger Toshav, treat him like we treat each other. Yes, but if he's not a Jew, I mean, he's not going to be treated as a Jew. So certainly has to be treated with righteousness, and kindness, and you even extend tzedakah to him, etc. But you don't expect him, to be bound by the same laws that we're bound, because he's not. And if he wants to be bound by those laws, then he'll become a Jew. As long as he's not a Jew, it benefits probably both him and the Jews that there are people living in the land who can extend loans at interest and receive loans at interest, is how I read it. That's what I've got for us tonight, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Sunday, at the regular Sunday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a good night, good vach, Shavua Tov.